And the reason we record it is that this event is going to be published on CILT's YouTube site. So you will be able to look at this again, or if you have colleagues that couldn't make it, then you can advise them of that. So let me first start with an introduction. So my name is Andrew Young. I'm the chair of the US chapter for CILT, also a board member for North America. CILT, for those of you that aren't members or not really come across us before, we're an organization for professionals working in the transportation and logistics industries. So we cover a very broad area. Our members are people that are passionate about these industries, typically work in them, study them, are academics, policy members. We cover all different kind of sectors and all different roles within those sectors. Our mission is to share ideas, and through events such as this, kind of provide information, an opportunity for networking and learning to help improve the performance and the progression of our industries that we work in. In terms of CILT, we're a global organization. We have over 35,000 members around the world. We're in something like 37 countries, I believe it is now. And obviously we're here from the North America branch, which is primarily members from within USA and Canada. Okay, so today's webinar is, as I mentioned before, on intelligent transportation solutions and the systems therein. For me personally, as an advocate and someone who's worked in public transport and transit for many years, it's a fascinating subject matter, and I'm delighted with the two speakers that we have today. AJ O'Connor is the Intelligent Transportation Systems Director for TriMet itself, and also Adrian Pearmine from DKS, who's the National Director for Smart Cities and Connected Vehicles. I'll let them both give a little bit more of a bio of their role and their background themselves when I hand over to them for the presentation. In terms of just some hygiene factors before we start, everybody should be on mute. If you can please remain on mute for this event, and also if you could switch off your cameras, and then we can just have the cameras of the speakers during this event. We have time at the end, or we will make sure we have time for Q&A. So we really would like your questions, and both Adrian and AJ are kind of geared up to answer those questions. Please use the chat function. I think everybody now knows how Zoom works. It's down at the bottom of the screen, and type in your questions, and we'll go through as many of those as we can before we finish today. The final point I would say, Adrian and AJ have kindly provided a copy of their presentation, and we'll be sharing that to everyone after the event. So everyone will get a copy of the presentation, and also a link to where we posted the recording. So without further ado, I think I'll hand over to our two speakers, and let you take it away, guys.
Okay, I'll start us off. Thank you, Andrew, very much for the nice introduction. I'm Adrian Pearmine with DKS Associates, the traffic and transportation engineering and planning company based in Portland, Oregon. I'm our National Director for Smart Cities and Connected Vehicles. And I'll keep my bio super short because we want to get into the content here. For the last 30 years almost, I've been working with, consulting with public transportation agencies, city DOTs, state DOTs, and helping implement new emerging technologies and business models in the transportation space. And for the last several years, increasingly also working with private sector companies that are entering this emerging space and trying to help connect those dots between the solutions that they have and the needs of my public sector agencies. And AJ, when you do your introduction, I had meant to insert a slide in here to give a little bit more context around Portland and TriMet, and didn't do that. So maybe after introducing yourself, you can give a little bit of context of your agency and our region too.
Sure. So hello, everyone. I'm EJ O'Connor. I'm the director of ITS for TriMet. And I have been with TriMet for almost 36 years. So have seen the evolution of technology in the transit space and how it relates to policy, which we're going to talk about, and how TriMet has tried to position itself to be a leader. As Adrian said, just to orient everyone about where TriMet is and the area that we're talking about, we're on the west coast of the US. We're roughly halfway between San Francisco and Seattle, a lot closer to Seattle. The Portland metro region is about 2.5 million people. TriMet is the main mass transit provider for the region, providing a small commuter rail, 60 miles of light rail, and an extensive fixed route bus network, and provides paratransit or lift service. So that is TriMet in a nutshell and where we sit. And I think we're ready to go ahead and start.
So I'll start us off. We're going to talk about innovation and disruption in our mobility space. A lot of folks talk about the convergence of multiple different technologies and business models, and you can call it ACEs or CASE or whatever acronym and jumbling of the words you want to use for connected, autonomous, shared, electric, and mobility technologies, big data. We're going to focus a bit more on shared mobility with a particular focus on the transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft and those kinds of companies, and the connected portion of this, particularly around mobile technologies and the impacts that the combination of these are having on congestion in our cities and on our public transportation agencies. And so as we affectionately call the TNCs, Uber and Lyft, they are increasingly going towards new levels of autonomy. But as we'll discuss here, they are answering a lot of mobility challenges and needs that we have, but in many cases impacting congestion in a negative way, and in some cases impacting public transportation in a negative way. I'll be referencing a few different documents here. You'll see a lot of references from Dr. Susan Shaheen and her team at University of California, Berkeley, and their Transportation Sustainability Research Center. I'll be starting off with a little bit more from Bruce Schaller, who was the Deputy Commissioner for Traffic and Planning at the New York City Department of Transportation when the TNCs first started coming into New York City. And he has gone on, when he left the public sector, to start Schaller Consulting and become a #1 or at least primary voice in the impacts that shared mobility and emerging mobility and particularly the TNCs are having on congestion and public transportation. There's a lot of additional resources out there that are taking a look at this convergence, this disruption in mobility and what's happening at our curbs, what's happening to congestion, what's happening to public transportation. So as Andrew mentioned, we've already shared a PDF copy of this with the Chartered Institute for Logistics and Transport. So anybody who wants to look at these slides and go dig deeper into this, there's a lot of good material out there. Schaller, when talking about impacts of TNCs in our urban cores, was really heavily focused on a handful of dense urban centers in particular. And San Francisco is the kind of the TNC capital of the West Coast and maybe much of North America, really. If you're familiar with San Francisco, if you're not familiar with San Francisco, if you look at the picture of the city on the right-hand side and you see the tall buildings and kind of the upper center of the picture, that's the financial district. This is really the downtown core of San Francisco. And as you would guess, on an average Friday, we're looking at the Uber and Lyft drop-offs in this heat map on the left-hand side. And so it gets really, really dark and dense in that urban center of San Francisco. The problem is our infrastructure is not built in a way that supports TNCs and allows the Uber and Lyft drivers a place to park and wait while they're waiting for somebody to put in a call request. It's not built like an airport with a big holding lot somewhere. And so our TNC operators end up driving around the blocks, waiting for somebody to put in a request. And then when they do end up pulling over, are often blocking a lane of traffic while somebody's getting into or out of the car. In many cases, if it's back to this sort of dense setting, they'll do it right in the middle lane, and people have to go through a row of parked cars or even moving cars. And so in addition to creating additional congestion in our downtown cores, a lot of times they're even creating safety hazards. San Francisco in particular wanted to monitor what those impacts are to congestion. And so they created their own dashboard looking at a number of factors that we consider as traffic engineers when looking at congestion: vehicle hours of delay, vehicle miles traveled, and speed. If you're looking at the left-hand side of this image, sorry, it's a little bit blurry, are three of the main factors that we look at when we're considering congestion. They built this dashboard to look at their downtown core, and then you can look over on the right-hand side where it says choose factors affected. So there's what they call the network effect, which is if we as a city closed a lane to traffic and added a bus or a bike lane or a bus lane instead of traffic, or restaurants are now set up out on the street, what is the effect on congestion that impacts to our traffic network have had? They talk about population and employment effect, and those are exactly what you would expect of, is there increased population in this part of town? Is there increased employment or decreased? And what are the associated impacts on congestion to those factors? And then the TNC effect. So what is the impact on congestion from the Uber and Lyfts of the world? And have built this dashboard where you can click on a time period, look at AM peak, regular day, PM peak, for example, and then pick a subset, a segment of the network. And then the pie chart over on the bottom right will change shape depending on the impacts from each of those different factors. And so I picked one that I knew is over in the financial district, and I suspected would be heavily impacted by TNCs. And so you can see, at least in this downtown urban core, that Bruce Scholler's predicted impacts are proving out. At the same time this article came out, and all of this was pre-COVID. If you're wondering why a lot of my slides are going to be 2016, 2018, 2019 timeframe, as I think most of you can suspect, that when the world sort of shut down in 2020, had significant impacts on Uber and Lyft, had significant impacts on public transportation. As we emerge over the last 6 months, year, and continue to emerge, it's happening at different rates in different cities, and we certainly don't have enough years of data to really look at this. So we're largely looking at pre-COVID data here. But when Bruce Scholler produced those articles, there was a response from Robin Chase, who was the former CEO of Zipcar, one of the early car share companies. And she wanted to point out that if your car is stuck in traffic, it's not Uber and Lyft's fault. But maybe, yes, in those really dense urban downtown cores, the TNCs might be having a more significant impact than other places. But to be fair, let's look at cities across our country where rail is an option, meaning that there's multiple public transportation options available to the commuter. And you can see that taxis and rideshare if you look at a mode of travel down at the bottom of this, is really tiny percentage of the trips associated where the private vehicle is the private vehicle still continues to be the primary source of what's causing that congestion. So outside of that really dense urban downtown core, just wanted to point that out. We're not really beating up the TNCs in this conversation, but back to the public transportation conversation and back to Dr. Shaheen's work from Cal Berkeley. If you look at the top 30 transit agencies in the United States, this is looking over a year where the TNCs really had increased a lot of trips between 2015 and 2016. What were the impacts on our public transit agencies in terms of ridership? 80% of public transit agencies of the top 30 saw a decrease in ridership. And if you look down to the bottom of this table, a lot of them with pretty significant numbers. And so there's only a small portion that showed increases in ridership over that. And really only Seattle that had done a significant investment in tunnels and light rail expansion and a bunch of different programs to encourage public transportation use saw a significant increase over that time frame. Now, TNCs are just one contributing factor to that drop in ridership. So again, we're not trying to single them out, but in a lot of these municipalities, it was pointed out as a significant impact. So what can public transportation and our transit agencies do to respond to this new emerging mobility space? I'm going to talk a little bit about mobility hubs and mobility as a service. And then both AJ and I are going to talk about and primarily focus on sort of these national trends that we're seeing of transit working together with cities, recognizing that neither of the two of them can solve congestion alone. And so we need a combination of investment in infrastructure and policy changes, and really from the public transportation side of things, a focus on corridors with high capacity service, high frequency, high speed, and high reliability. And what AJ is going to be talking about a little bit here is the need for, bringing what you might call the subway level of service up to the rubber tire road high capacity corridor. People need to be able to rely on a bus is going to be here in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. I don't even need to look at the schedule. I know that it's going to be here and I will have a high reliable travel time to get me to my destination on time. So mobility hubs are the physical concept of a bus or train or whatever public transportation you've got hitting a major stop and then allowing people to get off and have access to multiple mobility choices for first and last mile, whether it's car sharing, ride sharing, bikes, scooters, you name it. And so these are just now kind of emerging in different metropolitan areas. We've been experimenting with them in many markets. MOS, or mobility as a service, is essentially the digital version of the mobility hub. So allowing me to plan my trip from point A to point B and see what all mobility choices are available to me. I can start my trip on a scooter. I can then take light rail for 10 miles, and then I can have a lift at the other end and get me to my doctor's office or my job on time. And that's the digital version of this. Mobility as a service is really a spectrum, starting with level 0, which is where we had been and have been in many markets still, where I need to go on to 3 different apps. I need to plan my first leg and then my second leg and then my third leg. And then I need to purchase each of those with no integration between them. Right now in many markets, and AJ will be talking a little bit about what we're doing here in Portland, we've gotten up at least to level 1 where I can do my trip planning and look at multiple mode choices, plan my first leg, plan my second leg, plan my third leg. If we can even get to level 2 where I can then pick, oh, today option C works the best for me, execute purchase and have it buy my scooter ride, buy my bus ticket, and then set up my lift and pay for my lift in the end, we'll be removing a lot of barriers that will allow people multiple mode choices. When you look at this spectrum, I might even argue that level 4 is sort of a little bit out of order. We almost need level 4 with governance and public-private cooperation to get into level 2 and level 3. But we'll talk a little bit about that. But AJ, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk more specifically about what TriMet's doing in a lot of these spaces. And then we'll come back and talk about a particular corridor that really kind of brings together a number of these technologies and the things that we've talked about here that both AJ and I worked on together.
Okay, great. So first of all, everything that Adrian is talking about, if you had a clean slate and you were building a transit agency from the beginning, you would, of course, equip all your vehicles with the necessary equipment, have the necessary systems to begin with. And of course, TriMet has been around since 1969, and other transit agencies around the world obviously evolved over decades and decades. So it's not a even playing field in every area. So what TriMet has tried to do is take a look at what our existing tools are and how can we improve them to provide the high capacity, reliable transit that Adrian was describing. And what TriMet has on our fixed route bus is we have a CAT AVL system, computer-aided dispatch automatic vehicle location is what that acronym stands for. Ours is provided by INIT, and we have the ability through their system to detour around areas where we have accidents, and we have tried to integrate that as much as possible. We've created physical changes. This is the combination of working with our traffic partners. We know that technology can solve some of the problems, but not all of the problems. So on the left-hand side, you see the creation of a bus-only lane, so that certain segments of our major arterials in Portland have been striped off and are only for bus or bike. And that has allowed us to get through some congestion areas to build that reliability. And like I said, when we encounter accidents or incidents, we now have the ability to detour around that, send that information not only to the operator, which is what you're seeing on the right hand. You're seeing the mobile data terminal that every fixed route bus operator in TriMet has that shows them where to go when something has changed. Next slide, Adrian. And to Adrian's point about high capacity corridors, we have a lot of data from that same CAT AVL system that lets us know with very high granularity where we have congestion. So we're able to identify the areas that we need to focus on and we need to improve. And it's back to the point about cooperation with our regional traffic partners. There's efforts to look at what is physically in the road. Can we create those kinds of lanes that we physically stripe off and change? Or what can we do from a technology standpoint? We'll talk about that a little bit later, about the first real example where the region has taken an entire corridor and made a lot of investments physically and with technology. Next slide, Adrian. One of the other key points is about 2017, I believe, we launched the HOP Fast Pass. It's our electronic fare collection system. And this was the perfect combination of major policy change and technology. Prior to implementing the electronic fare system, TriMet had literally dozens of ways you could buy and purchase a ticket, all kinds of different options. And the first thing we did from a policy standpoint was greatly reduce those options to very few options. TriMet partnered with the same vendor that provides our CAD AVL system in it to create the first account-based fare capping, open architected or open architecture electronic fare system in North America. Chicago was the first major city that had attempted to do it, and they did it successfully in a lot of ways. And we took the lessons they learned from them and took it basically one step further. We allowed the ability for Google Pay, Apple Pay, contactless cards, all to be used. So the picture on the left is a HOP FastPass card that you can purchase from TriMet. The system is account-based, so the smarts of the system are not in the card. They're in the back end. They're tied to your name. So if you lose that card, it's not like cash, which is common in other areas, and you can get it replaced and you haven't lost your value. So you can board that one way. You simply tap on a validator that's on a pole if you're getting on a light rail vehicle, or these same validators are mounted in buses. Or you can have a virtual wallet, which is the picture on the right, and just tap. Now, why is this fundamental to what we're talking about in the larger context? This is kind of the backbone for paying for your service. And this now provides us with an architecture, because like I said, it's an open architecture using APIs that are open, that allow us to expand this and integrate it in other ways. The city of Portland has a new program that they're developing called a transportation wallet that allows you to pay for parking and a series of other services that this system is now currently being integrated. So this is kind of one of the foundational building blocks. We talked about the CAD AVL. Now we have our electronic fare building block. Next slide, Adrian. And here's the first part that Adrian was talking about, where we have an open trip planner. So this was developed mostly internally with some partners. And this allows anyone in the Portland region to plan a trip. And as you can see with the buttons on the right hand, you can say that you can plan it starting with your bike. You're going to drive to a certain location. You're going to take Lyft or Uber to a certain location. It will price out the differences for you. It will, if you're biking, you can get the, I'm blanking on the name of the word, but essentially you can determine if your route is all uphill and you don't want an uphill route on a bike, you can make it flatter. But this is foundational because we've got that first part where you can plan your trip. You can't directly pay for it within this app, but if you are going to add Uber or Lyft, this will link to their system and automatically transfer all the information into their system for your last mile. So it's a huge step in creating the world that we all want, where you can plan, book, and pay for your transportation in one area. And as the name implies, Open Trip Planner, this is open source and available to anybody that wants to use it. Yep, next symbol. The next major technology that TriMet has embraced is transit signal priority. We were one of the very first with what's now called legacy, but I can remember when this was being first installed. This was a very hardware-centric, now rudimentary system where you have a infrared emitter on the bus that when it gets within to a certain range, that emitter can hit a detector that's hanging off a traffic signal and requests transit signal priority to that signal controller cabinet on the right. TriMet and the city of Portland were one of the first cities in the country to implement this, and it had worked relatively well for many years. And now, though, we are making the leap forward with what we are referring to as the next generation transit signal priority system. And this old system, as this slide indicates, is very hardware heavy. It requires labor from the city of Portland to clean and range those optical detectors. And there are challenges with weather, fog, heavy rain. The IR can be affected. Next slide, Adrian. So some people on the call might be familiar with when TriMet was first looking at replacing the old legacy system. We had a major corridor, it's called the Division Transit Corridor, that was basically going to be a bus rapid transit implementation. And we had a decision to make whether we were going to stay with that legacy system or whether we were going to explore other options. We decided to explore other options and look at this new architecture, which replaced the hardware required on the traffic signal, the emitter, and it did not require, the receiver, and it did not require the emitter from the bus. This new next-gen TSP architecture was cloud-based. The onboard units on the vehicle, there's a mobile access router with cellular service that would provide all the information that we know about that bus to our TSP cloud provider. What's the bus's location? Where is it heading? How full is it? Essentially everything that we know about that bus. The TSP vendor in turn comes up with an estimated time of arrival at a particular intersection and passes that on to the traffic signal cabinet. Initially, this diagram shows that we're going through the city's traffic center and their central system is speaking to that cabinet. That was one of the options. We're now doing it slightly different. Next slide, Adrian.
Yeah. And I'll be diving into that a little bit in more technical detail in a few minutes.
So far, we've been talking a lot about fixed route bus. The light rail vehicle, although most people think of a light rail vehicle as vastly more sophisticated than an old rubber tire bus, from an ITS perspective, it is in the dark ages. And we had a project pre-COVID to essentially try and bring the light rail vehicle up to the same level of ITS capabilities. And we called that project the Rail Operations Optimization Technology Project, or ROOT. And the functionality that we want to deliver, you can see on the left. Essentially, it was placing a IoT gateway on the vehicle that had the same capabilities or surpassed them on the bus, and integrated the vehicle health data for a bunch of the subsystems on that light rail vehicle, which you see down on the far right corner. Unfortunately, COVID and the pandemic sort of killed the idea of doing this in one fell swoop. So instead, we've been doing it sort of piecemeal, I guess would be the way to put it. When we're replacing any new vehicle fleet with a new fleet, they're coming now with this new architecture, and we're looking at other ways to equip the existing fleet with this new technology. This new technology would provide us with the ability to do TSP for light rail vehicles, among other things. Next slide. So this is where we are now. We have the open trip planner. We have got our fixed route bus to a level where we have the technology on the bus, and we have our next generation cloud-based TSP system that allows us to really get at reliable, fast and frequent service. We have some work to do on the light rail vehicle side, and I think that's it for that slide. We are working with the region in general. This is the Enhanced Transit Corridor Plan that identifies those highly congested areas and identifies where we want to do sort of the physical changes, like you had seen where we're designating certain lanes for bus only. So the region is pretty cohesive in the approach that we're trying to take. And this is an example of where that's coming together. Likewise, this slide shows that when you have high capacity transit and you have high capacity transit vehicles, you can move people through the same area vastly more efficiently than you can when you have single occupancy vehicles. Next slide. And this is an example when TriMet is investing in remodeling or upgrading any of our mobility hubs. This is an example where we had an existing transit center, and now when we're making capital improvements to it, we're thinking about all the ways that we can really make it a mobility hub as opposed to a single purpose, in our case, mass transit hub. And this last slide really shows what we're trying to get at. We're trying to basically move as many people efficiently as possible. And it's sort of a mind shift. Like I said, I've been in transit for 36 years. And when I first started, there was much more of a single mind focus on our mission only, and our mission only was much more narrowly defined. And as Adrian indicated, the region and our partners in working together, everyone has this vision more or less now than we have in the past. And now we're aligning our technology investments, our capital improvement investments, and our policies so that we can really deliver this future.
So I'll take it back over here for a project that AJ had referred to, and that we work together closely on the technology piece of this. The Division Transit Project is many agencies across the country have been looking at bus rapid transit. We're not calling this bus rapid transit, and I'll explain why in a second, but many of the same components of longer vehicles that hold more people with more entry and exit points and all kinds of options to pay, dedicated bike lane that's separated from the bus. The reason we're not calling this a bus rapid transit corridor is usually BRT involves really heavy investment in infrastructure along the roadway and dedicated lanes and dedicated roadway just for the bus. We did what would be kind of a BRT light or BRT ultralight, where we did all of the enhancements at the bus stop and the enhancements in the vehicle itself, and many other elements without all of the heavy infrastructure investment on the roadway itself. And I'll explain that in a second. This is a multimodal corridor and a high safety corridor. There's a lot more crashes, especially east of 82nd. I'll show you a map here in a second what that means, but you're twice as likely to be in an accident or die, unfortunately, east of 82nd Avenue than west of 82nd Avenue. So in partnership with PBOT, our Portland Bureau of Transportation, having dedicated safe bike lanes and pedestrian flow and safe interaction with traffic was a critical component of this. This is one of our FX or frequent service stops. You'll see AJ had shown the bus only lane before. We've gone a step further and started throughout the city to use these red painted stripe to show when a lane was supposed to be used for bus only, or in this case, bus only and turning. We're going to focus now on the technology part, and then I'm going to kind of close this out and get us into Q&A here as quickly as possible. But the transit signal priority, that next gen transit signal priority, is what we're showing in this red square. So all of the eastern segment of this, and this map is not to scale, so much, it's more like 80% of the route itself is on next gen transit signal priority. The arrows there are showing where this image was and the direction of traffic. So we're looking at 162nd Avenue and a westbound bus moving through there. As AJ talked about, the legacy transit signal priority has been implemented with partnership with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, but that's just a small portion of the overall service area of TriMet. And so when they were looking at division and talking about what our next generation signal priority should be for this corridor, we started saying, you know, whatever we choose for this corridor shouldn't be in the vacuum of just this one corridor. We're going to want to expand signal priority throughout this region, and all of the blue dots that you see outside of that shaded area do not have signal priority on them right now. So let's pick a solution that is scalable and expandable into the future that will serve our entire region. We want to get rid of this local bus to intersection communications piece and go to the cloud solution that AJ was talking about before. And he talked about how all of the buses would then be sending in a subset of data. Where am I? What bus number am I? Where am I in my schedule? How full am I? And then the cloud solution will take in all of that different data from all the different buses and say, oh, okay, you're a bus on the division corridor, you're approaching 39th Avenue going westbound, you're full. There is a eastbound bus also approaching 39th Avenue that is empty. Based on certain business rules that we've determined with our traffic partners, what is the level of priority that we want to apply to each of those buses? And most importantly, what is the estimated time of arrival? What is the ETA of when that bus is going to be at that traffic signal? And so when we look at that legacy system, we talked about the signal doesn't know that the bus is approaching until it gets within that zone of infrared. We're able to talk minutes ahead of time to the upcoming traffic signals with the estimated time of arrival of when the bus is going to be there. And the reality is we're not going to be able to turn this on throughout the region overnight. So we will be in a hybrid reality that supports both this cloud solution on the corridors that have next-gen TSP and still use the infrared component on corridors when we don't. This says infrared or local radio communications. This is kind of a more genericized, if you will, image. There's a lot of first generation signal priority systems out there that use infrared, like TriMet. Many other sort of second generation use essentially the same architecture, but local radio. In case of TriMet, as we mentioned, it's all optical and infrared. We went through a procurement process, a competitive procurement process, and TriMet selected Light, a company out of the Bay Area, that this is their architecture, exactly what we were looking for. But as AJ was indicating, instead of the Light cloud talking to the traffic agency's central traffic management software, there's actually a device that is part of the Light network that's riding on each of our traffic partners' networks that's talking more directly to the signal itself and giving those ETAs of when it's going to be there. So how are we doing so far? If you look at red light wait time, so along this corridor, how much time are buses average spending at the red light prior to September? You can see somewhere between almost 7 to 8.5 minutes along this corridor, buses were sitting at red lights. We went live in mid to late September. It took a little while, not very long, as you can tell from this chart, but there's AI built into the Light system that makes it smarter and smarter and learning from real world conditions, and then reached a point of sort of equilibrium, if you will, with what we consider pretty tremendous performance starting in October of red light wait time. And another way of looking at success is when the bus approaches an intersection, how often is it hitting the green light? So again, going live in mid to late September, letting the AI do its magic for just a number of weeks, really, and seeing tremendous success. What we're also finding is the bus on-time performance is also around 90% along this corridor, which is not unusual with rail, but is quite unusual with rubber tire buses on a high dense corridor like this. So we're about to embark on a on-off study to look at the data of a number of different performance metrics along this corridor. We'll set the table a little bit here for part 2 of this presentation, which will work out with the Chartered Institute for Logistics and Transport, come back to you in a couple months and do much more of a deep dive into how this technology works on the next gen TSP and performance, and show you some dashboards and show you some images of both buses and animations of what we see on our computer screen when a bus is going down a corridor. And with that, Andrew, I'm happy to hand it back over to you to start the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Adrian and AJ. Fascinating conversation. As I think we predicted, we got a number of people asking questions. So bearing in mind, we've got about 11 or 12 minutes to go, I'd say that we kind of dive straight in to these. I think, I'm not sure if you can see the questions that's on the right-hand side of my screen, but if we can just start off with, so the first one quite easy. The data, I think, referring to your earlier slides, Adrian, I think you mentioned that data dates back to pre-COVID.
Yeah, Warren either asked that question right as I was answering it, or he missed the answer. I'm not quite sure which, but with the COVID era data, it impacted the TNCs and transit so hard that the data just dropped off the charts. We've been watching it come back up in some cases to pre-COVID levels with congestion, but ridership and other transit performance is still coming up a little bit more slowly. TNCs are a little bit all over the board. And so we're kind of waiting for that data to stabilize and be more stable for a couple of years to be able to look at a lot of those same types of things that I was talking about before post-COVID. So everything I was looking at was pre-COVID.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the questions in order. So the next one from Robert might require a longer answer, but it may be if you can kind of answer this in the short way. So I hear Adrian talking about expensive, high density transit solutions to the challenges transit is facing, suggesting that don't the TNCs and micro mobility growth and popularity suggest that low density and distributed solutions may be an alternative, what the market wants?
Yeah, so I'll start the answer, and then AJ, see if you want to fill in any gaps or expand it. It's a really, really good point. There is no one solution that fits all, especially for metropolitan areas and especially across the country. So there are investments that we need to make in our dense urban downtown corridors that are a little bit different than investments that we need to make in our neighborhoods that are different than investments that we need to make in less dense areas. And TNCs are serving a lot of need, and whether they serve a person's entire trip or whether they serve a first last mile trip to get you to a high dense corridor, it's the combination of all of these mobility choices that are what we need to get people out of that single occupant vehicle. And so there is no one size fits all, and it's a great question. And we've also, as we demonstrated with the division corridor, this isn't the kind of heavy investment that you make with light rail or even heavy BRT and heavy infrastructure. We were able to offer these kinds of solutions at a much lower cost. But it is that combination of transit and first last mile mobility that ultimately we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that and maybe answer a question further down. Pre-COVID, I think when TNCs first appeared on the market, basically every mass transit agency viewed them as a competitor. And I think that has changed dramatically. As Adrian said, they're now viewed as a partner. And the area that we think that they're going to be of the highest use is in very rural areas or where our network doesn't reach out and we can serve the people that need the last mile, as Adrian indicated. The other considerations that factor into micromobility. So we are going to be piloting some micromobility solutions also, but it will be focused on more rural last mile focus. But equity also factors into basically everything TriMet does now. And one thing that the pandemic taught us is ridership plummeted, as Adrian indicated, but the people that relied on us were in the lower socioeconomic categories. And we have a mission to provide mass transit for those folks. And we are in the process of redesigning our entire fixed route bus network as a result of the experience with the pandemic and focusing on how we serve that lower socioeconomic, getting them to job centers, and focusing on trying to concentrate on high capacity, frequent and reliable, like Adrian said, so that they know that every 15 minutes the bus is coming in, it's going to get them to work on time. So.
And Andrew, looking at the next question from John Coleman around the San Francisco dashboard that I had up there, looking at throughput, speed, and delay, and he's asking if there's a metric that speaks to success in transportation where people reach destination. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, because where the assumption within that dashboard was that everybody started a trip and ended a trip where they wanted to end the trip. And so maybe John could either type in a little bit more follow up to the second, what he's asking, or we could have him come off mute in a minute. But while he's maybe typing up a follow-up question to that, AJ could probably handle the next two questions. I'm just trying to get as much in the last 5 minutes as possible here.
Yes, privacy, protecting the personal data, everything, nothing is identifiable. So it's all anonymized if you're talking about hop, where you're tapping on. And we're only a tap on system. We are not a tap off. So we don't know where you got off. You can try and infer it. And we are trying to do that for planning purposes, but it's all anonymized. So that the privacy is protected. Is there other transportation companies in the city that we're trying to integrate in technologies with? If you mean other mass transit, TriMet is really the 800-pound gorilla in the Portland metro area. Vancouver, Washington is just across the river. They have a small transit agency, but they are also part of our HOP system. So yes, we do integrate with them. It does create challenges because we're in two different states. So there was a year's worth of work figuring out how we would divide the revenue that CTran, that's the transit provider in Vancouver, they run buses into downtown Portland. So yes, we absolutely work with other transportation providers, and there were challenges specifically around different state laws. The region is also expanding the major bridge over the Columbia River that goes into Vancouver, and we're likely to run light rail into Vancouver, Washington, and that will also require lots of integration and challenges.
Okay, I just noticed that John came back with his follow-up on there, essentially saying, you know, is there a way in which the system could be gamed in a way? I mean, I guess you are the only real operator there, rather than it being lots of private companies.
What John's asking about is back to the San Francisco dashboard and looking at impacts to congestion. And yeah, I think to a certain degree, the data that they're getting from either the transit agency or in that case, really the TNC is about whether people are reaching their destination or not. That's not what's being demonstrated in that dashboard. What they're really looking at segments of the roadway and what's happening there. And so I think that that's a different metric and a very interesting question. And it kind of comes back to AJ's point around equity. And there was a slide earlier that we had in the presentation that I took out because there was a fear for a few years where Uber and Lyft were starting to either invest in or buy bike share companies and scooter share companies and trying to have this entire ecosystem of mobility on their platform. And on the one hand, that's great from a removing barriers standpoint and giving everybody that access to first and last mile and giving you options to not have to get into the single occupant vehicle. But on the other hand, they then own the entire platform. And they are, as AJ pointed out, not obligated to make sure that they're delivering equitable service to all neighborhoods, to all people throughout the region in the way that TriMet is. And so, John, I'm just going to have to say that for the dashboard in San Francisco, that's not the kind of information they're trying to show there, but it's a valid point.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Adrian. And we're right up to the limit really in terms of time now. We have a number of questions that we haven't been able to address. Could I possibly ask you guys to maybe provide a follow-up and we can share those with the link after the meeting?
Yes, if you can provide us, coming out of the chat bar here, this list of questions, AJ and I will work on responses and you can share them out to everyone else.
I'll do that. So sorry for those of you that did ask that we're not able to get to them, but very, very generous of Adrian and AJ to kind of follow up on those. So just for the last few seconds of this this session, I'd like again to thank both our speakers today. Fascinating topic. It is great being based in the US as I am to actually hear from, I think, one of the really leading kind of thought leading innovators in transit. So thank you both very much indeed for today's presentation and obviously all of the hard work that you put in on making this a success in TriMet, and we wish you all the best for that developing. I'll just close by just reminding everybody that we will be sending out a link to this presentation. So you'll get that by email where you can see that, and also a copy of the actual presentation itself in a PDF form. I'll just thank everyone for your time today, for joining. If you have an interest in topics around logistics and transportation, please consider joining CILT. You will also receive in our email a little link to kind of how you become a member. You can be an active member, you can be a member that attends these kind of events. So thank you all indeed, and wish everybody a happy and successful day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.